See. All right. Good evening, guys. We have a special guest joining us today. We're going international again. This time we're going on the other side of the world. We have Colin Seis joining us. It is actually lunchtime where he is at. Um, and so I'm going to let Colin give a introduction to himself, where he's at in the world, and we'll just kind of give you guys a chance of a little insight where he's coming from. The reason for this conversation is because Ottawa County Conservation District is hosting a field day with him on August 1st. And so just trying to give everybody a little quick insight into kind of who Colin is. There's lots of content out there, lots of good content in field. He's 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 an award-winning farmer. I believe at one time it was said he had his farm, Winona, was the most researched farm in Australia. Um, but I'll let him get into it, let him introduce who he is, and we'll go from there. So, Colin.
Okay, thank you. Yep, I am a farmer. I guess what you would call a rancher uh, uh, and farmer. In other words, we run livestock and grow crops as well. The I mainly run merino sheep, and merino sheep are the dominant or the most common animals run in Australia. And we run merino sheep for wool production, but also meat as well. I do have run cattle as well as that. 2,000 acres here, um, about 25-inch rainfall uh, per year, and reasonably evenly distributed throughout the year. So it's quite okay rainfall. Um, the main crops that I grow are mainly what you would call small grains, wheat, oats, barley, those types of crops. And interestingly, in Australia, there's very few corn or soybeans grown. A lot of it's related to our soil types. Certainly in Australia, we don't have uh, anywhere near as good soil as you have through your Midwest areas. We do have some pockets of very good soil, but generally it's where I am is granite soils. But that's okay. What I guess what it has forced us to do with those soil types is to learn how to manage those soil types, and a way of doing it is reducing costs as far as possible. And certainly in a variable climate like we have in Australia, we can have everything from floods to droughts and everything in between. I changed agricultural practices about 35 years ago now. I was what's commonly called now industrial agriculture. A lot of fertilizer, a lot of pesticides, all of that. But we had a major wildfire, which burnt our farm totally and killed most of our sheep, 3,000 sheep we lost in that. And I had to learn to do things differently to survive. So I just worked out a low input system to survive. But then out of that came some very interesting things that were totally different, which I guess was the forerunner of what is now called regenerative agriculture. So I guess I've been in that space for many, many years. It certainly wasn't called regenerative agriculture when I started. It wasn't called anything. In fact, a lot of people would have most likely said that what I was doing was poor agricultural practices, but all I was doing was surviving. So, but there was a lot of very interesting things came out of that. One of them is profit. As I reduced a lot of the inputs that we found we really didn't need, as our soils improved, became well, restored the soil ecosystem really. Everything started to fall into place. Things like so I saw chemistry improved. I saw biology, microbiology improved. Everything improved. And that was driven by plants mostly. And in my case, a lot of perennial plants, our native perennial long-lived plants. And then out of that, I started developing a technique called pasture cropping, which is perennial cover cropping, and, and also adopting holistic grazing management around that same time. This was in the early 1990s. I developed a lot of this stuff. So, and over time, a lot of interest in this, and consequently, I get to talk all over the world now about how we can change and how we can do things differently.
Um, I know. I mean, I know your story, a little bit. What year was your bushfire? What year was that?
Yep. In 1979,
Okay.
I
So
was really young.
so
Yep.
so before so were you already doing zero till before that time, or did the zero till, your no till, did that come after the fire?
No, I started zero tilling after the fire,
Okay.
and I was simply just adopting the farming methods that my father used, and he very innovative, and he adopted what is commonly called now the Green Revolution type of farming from about the 1960s on, which meant uh, higher rates of fertilizer and pesticides, and trying to get crops and pastures uh, um, performing or growing to their maximums um, with high rates of fertilizer. So I grew up with that form of agriculture uh, and ploughing to grow crops. Um, I the fire got me looking at changing what I was doing in everything. So I started looking at what we were doing in our cropping and growing crops, and I was running into problems with growing wheat with crop diseases, just and nutrient decline, all those things associated with too much ploughing. Uh, I was getting well, like I said, crop diseases, but pest, insect attack, all those things. Anyway, at the time, I got some agronomic advice, and the main agronomic advice was to double the fertilizer rate. And interestingly, the same advice is given today. So, but it was also interesting that that rate of fertilizer that I was advised to put on was toxic to wheat plants, or especially the nitrogen in it was toxic to wheat plants, because we in Australia here put almost everything down the tube with the grain, with fertilizers. It's a more efficient way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, so I didn't do that. I didn't adopt any of that. In fact, I went the other way, and then I started looked, and I was looking at zero tillage after that. And then I went from zero tillage to looking at doing that. I could see that we were using too much herbicide and too much fertilizer with those crops. So I started looking at other ways of doing things. And then um, uh, actually, I will talk about it during the day, but the pasture cropping, the perennial cover cropping method uh, was developed not with a great deal of intelligence from me at all, but good friend of mine and farming neighbour. We just we often used to sit around and have a few beers and anything else we could drink and, and solve our problems of the world. And after about 10 or 12 Australian beer one night, we came up with this lunatic idea about planting crops into living perennial grasses. And that's where the perennial cover cropping or pasture cropping methods came from. Just two drunk uh, two drunk people one night, two drunk farmers one night. And that's where the idea came from. So,
You
so
know,
there's no
that
great
that that
science.
that might be the first story ever of we're gonna drink till we solve the world's problem. Well, yeah, finally someone did it.
Yeah, yep. Yeah. The but in saying that, we mate of mine, Darryl Clough, his name is, my neighbour. We used to do that often, but most of the time we can't remember all the good ideas we thought of. That was about the only one that we could remember the next morning. So,
So
um,
who knows
but
what all we all forgot.
absolutely. And now that method now is being adopted all around the world. So you never know what might happen.
That's right. That's right. So basically, so from 79 to the early 90s, you were kind of just you were experimenting, you were trying to figure things out. Um,
Yeah.
because at that, I mean, at that time, I mean, shoot, I mean, no till like here in the United States would have just been getting started. It had been started for a few years before then. But the whole, I mean, the cover cropping thing, there was a few guys doing it, but it was literally just a few guys. And so you were just almost walking through the wilderness, trying to find your way.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and at some point in
Yes.
there, did you, and it, so it was, I'm assuming it was before, um, you guys came up with the idea of pasture cropping. Had you already taken a holistic management? Had you already just started doing planned grazing, or was that kind of a at the same time
No,
then?
that at about the same time with the planned grazing. I'd heard of Alan Savory's work with grazing management, and like a lot of people, I was no different. I thought, no, that can't work. You know, you put animals together and move them around. But I guess I always think about things differently. And I said, and I said, I'll prove it won't work. Well, that's fairly stupid, trying to prove Alan Savory wrong. So, so I've told Alan this story too. so, and so I just put some, I increased the mob size of about half of the sheep at home. I had about 1,000, not that many, about a quarter of the sheep, about 1,000 sheep in one lot, in one group, one mob, and started to just rotate them around, move them around. And I had no idea what I was doing. Really, it could have been a total failure, but I could see from that it was going to work. And I proved myself wrong really quickly. And then I tried to work out how to do it better
Mm-hmm.
from that point on. And eventually I did an holistic grazing course, but I didn't do that until 2002 or something. Um,
So, so,
and
so,
by
so
then
it,
I sort of worked out how.
right, right.
I
So it
don't
was kind of,
recommend people do
yeah,
it.
right, right. Don't do it the hard way, is what you're saying.
Don't do it. No, do it the easy way. Go to a holistic management course.
So basically, it was almost a perfect conversion of the you were starting to like you said you heard of Alan Savory, you were kind of aware of what it was, and so you were kind of doing
Yeah.
that at the same time as you're like, hey, let's try this crazy idea of planting winter wheat into our. I'm assuming at that time a lot of it was probably almost more summer weeds than it was summer grasses, from what I've heard you
Yes.
say,
Yep.
um,
That's
because
right.
they're going to go dormant, and it just kind of converged
Yep.
together, and you just yeah, like you said,
Yeah.
you couldn't have figured it out if you were trying to figure it out. Basically, is how great it worked.
That's right. And one of the things about being totally ignorant, is that I didn't know that it wouldn't work
Right.
because everyone else told me that it can't work, including scientists. You were copping flack from everyone from doing this stupid stuff. And I in my head, I thought, oh no, it should work, but no one else thought it would work. So it was a bit of a lunatic idea. But part of the key to it working well was combining it with good grazing management practices as well, and using animals in there to prepare the cropping area to plant the crops, like grazing them. You almost like using a roller crimper to terminate a cover crop. We're using large numbers of animals to terminate this perennial grass, which is actually functioning as a cover
Mm-hmm.
crop.
Well, and I'm sure with with the grazing, um, by consuming part of those plants, by chopping them up into smaller pieces from the hoof action. Basically, you're balancing your carbon to nitrogen ratio, uh,
Yep.
and not having the nitrogen tie up because you have too heavy of a carbon load with the
Yep.
C4 grasses that you're trampling down, and then you're planting a cereal into it. So yeah, I mean, yeah, when you talk about, I've heard you on uh, other webinars or other presentations say that it's the grazing management that makes the cropping part of the pasture cropping. That's what makes it work
That's right.
more time.
Yes.
It makes it more consistent. It makes it work consistently, basically.
That's exactly right. And you're absolutely right with the carbon to nitrogen ratio. I couldn't, early days, no one was talking about the carbon to nitrogen ratios or any of this stuff in the early 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know anything about it. But I did find that if I grazed it heavier and removed a lot of that dry material, the crop was better. And that was why. Plus, they were adding a lot of nutrients with manure and urine
Mm-hmm.
to the paddock as well.
Right. Right. Um, and again, we won't get too far into the weeds. Um, was was your neighbor Daryl Clough? Was he also a sheep grazer, a sheep farmer?
Yes, sheep and cattle. He was running more cattle
Okay.
than
Okay.
I was.
Gotcha. Gotcha. But are they still doing it on their operation, doing the pasture cropping?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. They're still going there. Yep. Yep.
Gotcha.
His
Gotcha.
son's on the now. Yeah.
Gotcha. Gotcha. How much adoption of pasture cropping have you seen locally in your own backyard, and then kind of regionally in Australia, and then globally?
Yep. There's a lot. It's difficult to know. I run into a lot of them when I do workshops around Australia. A lot more than I'm aware of. But we don't really know. But it looks as though there's well over a million acres or something worldwide. Um, and we don't know the numbers on that, but there's a lot of adoption here in Australia. There's varying adoptions. I know there are some people in the US, in your country, been doing a bit. Um, and there was some a trial work done by Texas University on some, I don't know how it went. That was pre-COVID, so I don't know whether it was ever, whether COVID really stopped that research or not. I'm not sure now.
Gotcha.
Um,
Gotcha.
so, but there's a bit happening around. Certainly, there was also some research work done at the Land Institute on pasture cropping quite a while ago.
So it's it's an accepted practice in Australia. It's not,
Oh yes, oh yes, yeah, yeah.
and even by your universities.
That's right. Yes, yeah. And our research organisations, like this, my farm here you mentioned before, is one of the most researched in Australia, and that research has been done by most of our universities, and in my state, plus our main research organisation as well in Australia here. So there's been a lot of work done on it. We have a lot of data on it and how it works and why and that which I'd have loved to have known when I was first starting all that information, but it was too far out there that no one wanted to
Right,
know.
right. Yeah, yeah. They were like, we're not going to waste our time going to that lunatic's place.
Yeah. So most of the research work was done after I'd worked out how to do it anyway. So
Right, right. I just think that says a lot about your universities in Australia, that it didn't take them it didn't take them 30 years to start acknowledging it and start doing the research. It took them maybe 10 or 15. Would you say that's fair to say? Before they started like, hey,
yeah,
what's going on
yeah,
here? Let's go try and figure this out. Let's go do how can we kind of move it around the country? Where does it fit around Australia? Because
yeah,
I mean, I know most Americans think Australia, oh, all they think of is the outback. It's like, no, you don't understand. Australia, there's parts where it's like where you're at is very similar to, and I know you said this, take away the snow, maybe, but basically Kansas,
yeah,
Oklahoma, very similar. but then you go to
Yep.
Queensland and it's probably going to be more like southern Gulf Coast Texas. It's going to be much more rainfall. Then you got you
That's
got
right.
your wheat belt in South Australia,
Yep.
Victoria, and Western Australia, and it's 300 to
Yeah.
500 mils of rain. And you're not going to grow
Yeah.
anything over summer because you don't have any rain over summer in a lot of those areas. It's very challenging. And so, yeah,
That's right.
just
It's a South Australia and Western Australia is very much like California. It's a Mediterranean
okay.
climate.
Yeah, right
So,
there. There you go.
uh,
Gotcha.
well,
Gotcha. Um, I guess to kind of wrap up here, like I said, I don't want to give away too much information, guys. Uh, there's plenty of discussions like this out there on YouTube, plenty of presentations that he's done over the years. Uh, One thing I always kind of enjoy doing with speakers like Colin is going back and looking at stuff from 10 years ago to more recent and kind of seeing how things have changed. And so that's kind of what I wanted to ask you. Um, how has the operation changed in, say, the last 5 years? Or do you kind of just have this thing on cruise control? You have it figured out
yeah.
um, that you're enjoying it at this point. You don't have to try all the new things and because you got it figured out and it's humming along and it's working.
It's certainly humming along and working, but I can't help myself. I have to try new things. So, um, and that's part sometimes related to machinery. I keep on because even the machinery is that in itself is interesting. Because, like I said earlier, after the fire here, we had no money at all. So I made my zero till seed drill. And then, but now I just keep adding new things to it and try, like liquid injection and all sorts of strange things. But anyway, I got off track there a bit. But I guess the main thing that's happened, well, it's probably 15 years ago now. I looked at multi-species combinations of crops, but interestingly, because the grass itself is the cover here, my multi-species is not actually a cover crop. It's a crop in itself. It's a multi-species crop. So, and I'm going to be talking about this generally, but I sow a lot of multi-species crops now. I started to grow them originally just to just move the soils to a higher level. Um, and then and then because we graze everything in this country, like a lot of our crops are grazed and still are, like even just oat crops, even wheat crops are grazed. But these multi-species crops, which are basically covers the same as you grow in your country,
Mm-hmm.
um, in species, are absolutely magnificent a stock feed. Animals will perform exceptionally well on them. Great diet, and they will fatten and finish on these crops. Don't need grain to finish animals if you've got multi-species crops to finish them on. Um, so that's the real next step is that I'm still planting these into grassland, but in saying that, you don't need to plant them into grassland in that. So I'll be definitely talking about multi-species crops and how animals perform on them. And we've done some grazing trials here, which was like a proper tested trial. And I'll be talking a lot about that, about weight gains with animals on these multi-species crops in very, very good weight gains, equal to feedlot weight gains.
Gotcha.
So um,
Gotcha.
people are probably interested in that, so
Yeah.
I would
Um,
think.
and just real quick here, we'll get off on one little tangent here before we wrap up. But if I'm not mistaken, when you originally um, were growing grain, it was to grain your sheep over the winter, correct?
Yes, yes, yeah. Store the
Is that
grain
yeah?
and then yes,
Because
yeah.
that's
Uh,
for those that's a pretty common practice, pretty standard practice in Australia. Is that still something
yes,
that you are doing with your grain? Is graining your sheep to get them through the winter?
we still do some of that, and we keep a lot of grain for drought feeding strategies as well,
Mm-hmm.
so that because it can be drought at any time. Um, uh, but in saying that, we sell grain as well, but we keep our grain storage topped up all the time and then sell any excess that we have.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Like I said, that just kind of came to my mind because when I first, I think it was, oh gosh, oh 07, oh 08. First time I heard of you, it was in you're on covers of Acres magazine. I think that's what it was. I think that's where I
Yeah,
first heard of you, and I can remember that little tidbit in there. And so yeah, that always gets that seems to get lost anymore of what the grain, why you originally growing the grain, but that's always kind of stuck with me was that you were growing a grain, so you didn't have
yeah,
to go purchase your grain, and you could keep your
that's right.
keep
Yeah,
grazing everything. You didn't have to set aside stuff, and
yeah. When I developed the pasture cropping, the perennial cover cropping, my aim was always to produce grain from it. It wasn't just simply about growing a green crop for stock forage. It was about producing grain from it.
right,
And
and it
that's what
wasn't
I aimed to.
about the soil.
Oh no, it wasn't about soil early days.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
no.
yeah,
It
yeah.
was it was a low cost way of again a survival thing about producing grain.
Right, right. Well, no, that's good. Like so, that's I tell people all the time that a lot of these people that you see as innovators or uh, look at their farm now, it's like, well, if you go back and you listen to them talk, they weren't thinking about the soil at
Yeah.
all when they started. It was just something had to change for
No.
survival, financially, and this
Yeah.
is the path that they went down, and it just kind of stumble upon it. And
Yeah.
you're
Yep.
a great example of it, and um, that's always you're very humble about it, and you share your story, and you have a very unique story, partly because of where you are in the world, and it's a unique context to try and understand, but relate it to our context here in the high plains. So
Yeah. 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 No, I don't know whether any innovators to set out that much ex, uh, to solve the world's problems. I think mostly they're trying to survive.
right. Yeah.
So,
Yes. Yep. Yep. So, well, guys, like I said, I was gonna keep this short. Um, so you are gonna have a chance. Colin Seis will be here in Ottawa County Conservation District Field Day, Kansas, August 1st. If you're seeing this and you're not in Kansas, he is in Oklahoma in Enid on July 30th. And then the week after that, he is in South Dakota. I believe it's around Pierre, on August 6th.
yep.
And then he will be at Minokan Farm for the cows, covers, and grays. I think that's the name of it on August 8th. So you got three chances to see him. If you're in Kansas, though, your closest option is come join us. Come join us here in Ottawa County, north central part of the state. He will be here. We'll be in the field for the first half of the day and then classroom for the second half of the day. So just want to say thank you, Colin, for having a quick conversation on here with me. And like I said, guys, get registered. Any final closing thoughts, Colin?
No, I look forward to the trip, and yeah, hopefully I have a bit of a sleep before the first event after being on that plane for 15 hours or more.
Right, right. Well, like I said, I think we got all the details worked out. So as long as someone's there to pick you up at the airport and they get you there,
Yep,
I think we have the rest covered. So with that,
we
guys,
do.
I think we'll sign off there, guys. Thanks for watching. Um, and like I said, get registered.